afternoon and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles, your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. We've got a great program lined up for you today. In just a little bit, our San Diego correspondent Salvador Rivera is going to be joining us to lead a conversation with someone you've seen on the program before. We're talking about Pablo Manriquez of MigrantInsider.com. Always a great conversation with Pablo coming to us from the nation's capital. But first, as always, let's go ahead and start today's edition by taking a look at what's trending across the border. Starting in Minneapolis, where smoke filled the streets Wednesday night near the site of the latest shooting, as federal officers wearing gas masks and helmets fired tear gas into small crowds. Protesters responded by throwing rocks and shooting fireworks. Take a listen. Having a slight technical difficulty there, but it was a little over a week ago that Renee Good was shot and killed by an ICE agent. And since then, demonstrations have been taking place daily in Minneapolis. Agents who have removed people from their cars and homes have been confronted by angry bystanders demanding that they leave the city and the state of Minnesota. Mayor Jacob Frey said, quote, "This is an impossible situation that our city is presently being put in. And at the same time, we are trying to find a way forward to keep people safe, to protect our neighbors, to maintain order." Frey said the federal force, 5 times the size of the city's 600-officer police force, has, quote-unquote, invaded Minneapolis, and that residents are scared and that they are angry. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act and deploy troops to quell persistent protests against immigration and custom enforcement officers in the city of Minneapolis. He made that threat this morning. Now, Trump has repeatedly threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act, a rarely used federal law that would allow him to deploy the U.S. military or federalize the National Guard for domestic law enforcement purposes. And that's coming over the objections of not just the Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, but several state governors across the country. Quote, "If the corrupt politicians of Minnesota don't obey the law and stop the professional agitators and insurrectionists from attacking the patriots of ICE, who are only trying to do their job, I will institute the Insurrection Act, which many presidents have done before me, and quickly put an end to the travesty that is taking place in that once great state," Trump said in a social media post. Now, the last time a president used the Insurrection Act was in 1992 during the riots in Los Angeles following the Rodney King verdict. In that instance, local authorities asked President George H.W. Bush for that assistance. Again, local authorities asked the president for that assistance. Turning now to the number of detentions, the number of detained immigrants has increased by 75% to over 65,000 in the year that Trump has been in office for a second term. And detentions are the focus of his second term so far, aside from the growing foreign policy priorities that we've seen him take, not just in Venezuela in recent weeks, but also looking to annex Greenland, a country or an autonomous zone that currently belongs to the country of Denmark, one of our NATO allies. Now, that is according to a report out this week by the American Immigration Council. It says the Trump administration wants nearly 108,000 beds available by the end of this month, just a couple weeks from now. Funds for ICE detentions have increased from $3.4 billion in June to $45 billion through fiscal year 2029. There's also been an increase in immigrants arrested who have no criminal backgrounds. You can find a link to that report right now at borderreport.com. So that is a look at what's happening across the border right now. But stay with us, because when we come back after a very quick break, we're going to bring in our San Diego correspondent Salvador Rivera along with our guest for today's program from MigrantInsider.com, Pablo Manriquez. So stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Going to get through some more headlines before we get into bringing in our guest for today's program, Mr. Pablo Manriquez from MigrantInsider.com. Now, going back to what's been happening in Venezuela, Vice President J.D. Vance cast a tie-breaking vote on a resolution that would have limited the president's ability to order military action in the country of Venezuela without Congress giving the green light first. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer said after the vote that Republicans abdicated their responsibility under the Constitution, saying, quote, "What has happened tonight is a roadmap to another endless war because this Senate, under Republican leadership, failed to assert its legitimate and needed authority." Now, Trump pressured 5 Republican senators who joined with Democrats to advance this resolution initially last week. 2 of those Republican senators, Josh Hawley and another senator from Indiana, flipped under the pressure. As far as what Americans are thinking about the president's foreign policy, most are disapproving, according to a new AP NORC poll. Just about 6 in 10 Americans disapprove of how Trump is handling the issue of foreign policy, and most Americans, 56%, say that Trump has gone too far in using the military to intervene in other countries. Now, Trump's continued focus on global issues could end up being a liability given its sharp contrast with the American First platform he first ran on, and amid growing concerns with Americans about the costs they're paying to put food on the table. Now, as far as Americans' thoughts on how the president is handling immigration, just 38% of U.S. adults approve of how President Trump is handling immigration, which is down from 49% in March. Now, this poll was actually conducted between January 8th and 11th, shortly after the death of Renee Nicole Good. Now, despite most Americans not liking the immigration actions, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said today that the president could activate those federal troops, as we mentioned earlier in Minneapolis, if he wants to. And she defended a federal officer shooting the man that we told you about earlier in the program. Noem did not say whether or not the president would actually invoke the Insurrection Act to send forces to the city of Minneapolis. Time now to bring in our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera, along with our guest for today's program, Pablo Manriquez of MigrantInsider.com. Thanks so much for joining us once again, Pablo.
Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to ask you, Pablo, right away, and this is something Rudy was talking about, how the Senate basically gave President Trump carte blanche in Venezuela. Do you want to go in? Go ahead. And this happened because Josh Hawley of Missouri and Todd Young of Indiana flipped. What are you hearing there in the halls of Congress, and why do you think this happened? I can only guess.
Yeah, at this point, unfortunately, I can only guess too. There's always a lot of inside baseball on the back end of like things that are being traded into the future. So Josh Hawley obviously is very heavily involved in tech regulation. He has a lot of sort of these Missouri Christian issues that, from abortion to what have you. So there's no telling what he traded Venezuela down for. But the dynamic to understand this is that it has less to do with Venezuela and probably has more to do with an upcoming package, whether it's in the appropriations bill, whether it's through the continuing resolution. The most interesting thing right now that's happening is that the government is going to shut down again soon. So maybe it's something there. But unfortunately, we can only speculate that 2 things, right? 1, that Josh Hawley couldn't care less about the people of Venezuela. 2, that John Thune doesn't have the courage to stand up to Donald Trump the way Mitch McConnell did. Of course, Mitch is the big reason why we have Donald Trump right now is because Mitch McConnell, in his moments when he could have made it so that Donald Trump goes away forever, did not vote to convict Donald Trump for impeachment. He voted to acquit. So what we have here is a cowardly set of Republican lawmakers who, are going to do whatever it's not just that they are going to abide by whatever Trump wants. It's that they're going to abide by whatever Trump wants to get what they want down the road. I really don't think it's the case that Josh Hawley could care less about the War Powers Resolution or the people of Venezuela. I think that he was trading up down the road. And he does this a lot. He chickens out a lot. He often says that he's going to oppose something and then votes for it later once he gets a deal. And this is sort of par for the course in Congress. And to be clear, to be frank, this has been par for the course in Congress since there's been a Congress. This is something that has happened for well over 200 years. And it happens when Democrats are in power and it happens when Republicans are in power. Unfortunately, right now, though, it means that the war powers of Congress have basically been taken from Congress and given to the president. And the president obviously is out of his mind. He's aging. A lot of people are saying he has dementia, and we're giving him the war powers. So he will be able to use Venezuela as a precedent to continue threatening Greenland, to continue threatening Colombia, and so on. So the Senate has done something incredibly cowardly and incredibly short-sighted, but that is the hallmark of John Thune's leadership during this Congress as majority leader. He's incredibly short-sighted. He has given away he has eroded so many precedents that the Senate has run on for so long, just to give Donald Trump short-term victories.
Mm-hmm. And Trump's also implying that he might go into Mexico going after the cartels. So that would be something to see. Hopefully it does not happen.
Good luck. Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned we have been hearing rumors about another government shutdown. Tell us what that is all about.
So the government runs out of money again on the 30th. It's a soft shutdown, I think, on the 30th. And right now, the 8 appropriations bills have been reduced to 7 as they've taken the Homeland Security bill and taken it completely out because, nobody wants to fund ICE. And even the Republicans are kind of scratching their head about, why the Department of Homeland Security is asking for more money when they just got $170 billion through the end of the decade. So specifically for immigration enforcement. So for them to come back hat in hand and say they need more money is kind of ridiculous. But that's what the Pentagon does. The Pentagon has the National Defense Authorization Act, and then they have the Defense Appropriation Act. So they get to double dip every year and getting more money, right? That's what the Homeland Security Department wants to do too now. And Democrats are pushing back after being raked to the coals by their constituents after the murder of Nicole Good. But I would tell your viewers, expect a government shutdown. It's coming. Democrats have every incentive to have a long, painful government shutdown for Donald Trump, because what was happening during the last government shutdown is that Trump was being blamed, and then Democrats kind of walked away from it. But there seemed to be this strategic imperative that, well, we'll walk away from it for now into the new year. We'll all get to go home for Thanksgiving. We'll all get to go home for Christmas. But then we'll come back and shut down the government. So it'll be interesting. And shutdowns, so are always a blame game. Who wins the blame game is the subject of polling, right? So if polls show that Republicans are being blamed, the Democrats have no incentive to work with Republicans. And if polls show that Democrats are being blamed, then the shutdown will probably be pretty short.
Mm-hmm. You reported Migrant Insider, which I strongly recommend people get. ICE, and you just mentioned it, ICE wants more money, 10% more money. It already has more money than the U.S. Marine Corps. What could it possibly need another 10% for?
Well, it doesn't need any more money. Obviously, it has more money than it knows how to spend, especially for somebody like Kristi Noem, who has never had a budget 5% as big as the budget she has right now, which is why we're seeing so much idiocy in how they spend their money on private jets. They don't even vet their employees. I don't know if you saw, but there was a writer for Slate the other day who got hired for ICE with barely applying. She didn't turn in her background check. She submitted a blood test that was full of cannabis, urinalysis that was full of cannabis, and then they offered her the job anyway. So Kristi Noem is, at this point, a lot of people here in Congress especially are calling, she's known in Congress as the idiot, and that's something that's true on both sides of the aisle. People are just not impressed with her intellectual capacity, but really she's just a lightweight. She was a lightweight in Congress. She never really accomplished anything while she was here in the House of Representatives, and she was the governor of a state that has, 10 staffers to the governor. Now she has an agency that with hundreds of thousands of workers and a budget of, I think, $36 billion just for ICE. And, she's making the kind of mistakes that, people make when they get a ton of money for the first time and have no plan on how to spend it. And another thing you can remember about this ICE, the money for immigration enforcement, it's must spend. If they keep it, it disappears. So they have to spend it, right? So they're giving her money that she has to spend, and she sucks at spending it. So people are pushing back now in the appropriations process because it's like, well, she can't spend the
And we temporarily lost Pablo there. He was discussing ICE and his quest for more money for its projects and what it's doing, its work. She was talking about Kristi Noem not being able to spend the money wisely that she already has on her bank account for ICE.
Yeah, well, we try
Homeland Security.
Yeah, well, we try to see if we can get Pablo back online here with us. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that he mentioned the way she spends this money while asking for more money, because this was actually one of the things that was was included in the articles of impeachment that were filed against Secretary Noem yesterday by some House Democrats. Some more than, I think, 70 House Democrats signed on to introducing those articles. But specifically what was mentioned, and I found very interesting, was the mention of Secretary Noem allegedly steering contracts to a friend of hers and spending $200 million on an advertising campaign, on a recruiting campaign for some of these ICE agents, which, as we just heard Pablo mention, and this is something that I read about actually this morning, that journalist who is actually, interestingly enough, if you Google her name, she pops up on these conservative websites under one of these websites, for example, called Antifa Watch. So it just kind of goes to show that they're not only, pushing a quick recruitment of these individuals, but they're in a quick training session for these individuals, but they're maybe not taking their time through these background checks. Kind of going back to what he was saying on that, she calls herself kind of an activist journalist, and I wish I had the name in front of me right now. I don't have that, and I'll try to get that if we get Pablo back while you guys are talking so we can bring it up later. But one of the things that she had mentioned was that the questionnaire for her background check. So if, for those of you at home that don't know, and I'll use the military and Department of Defense, for example, if you are convicted of domestic violence, that means that you cannot legally, under federal law, carry a weapon. And in the military, if you're convicted beforehand, you're not allowed to join any of the branches. And if it happens while you're in, typically it's a fast track to, saying goodbye to your military career because you're no longer effective as someone who can't carry a weapon in the DOD, working for the Department of Defense or in the profession of arms as a whole. And what she had mentioned at one point was that during her background check, that was one of the questions. She never did her background check. And after a few weeks, she actually found out that she had actually been hired by ICE despite never even accepting the job, that she had been officially labeled as an ICE agent. And what was interesting is that background check was actually marked as completed 3 days into the future from when she had gotten that email saying that she had been accepted into the agency conditionally. So, going back to that, I think that's one of the biggest problems right now for Kristi Noem is how she's, take away all the things that we're seeing on the ground, that we're hearing on the ground, that all the back and forth. The effective spending of money, taxpayer dollars, I think has been a big problem for her. And I think that might actually play in, if I can just throw in my little bit of analysis here, Sal, that might actually play into how this impeachment process goes. Now, obviously, GOP, even though it's a slim majority now after some recent events with one lawmaker passing away, and perhaps some even redrawing of districts, depending on how the courts go, especially in California. We've spoken about it. Congressman Issa, for example, may no longer be on the GOP's bench, at least for now. There's talk about him moving here to the state of Texas to try to win another seat. But with that slim majority, we've seen now Senate Republicans, despite flipping last second, like at this time, Josh Hawley, who we just spoke about, it could be something that actually comes up again. And, depending on what happens after the midterms, you really could see that start to impact, everything. Again, take everything away that we've seen on the ground, what the reaction to ICE agents, the now 2 shootings in the city of Minneapolis, one that ended up fatally for Renee Good. I think it always comes back to money when we see these things happen, when it always comes back to the fraud, the waste, and the abuse. And if these are allegations that House Democrats have introduced into with the introduction of the articles of impeachment, I think we could start to see that actually take a bigger role come January of next year if the Democrats do win the House back and potentially even the Senate, as some people are talking about now, which is something that we always hear about the blue wave, but it's been so just talk for a very, very, very long time. So, You know, Salvador, you've been kind of tracking a lot of all of this going on, going back to, you know, some other things that we've talked about in the past, just the way people are being handled by these individuals being hired by ICE, for example, the arrest of, and we spoke to a gentleman from your area of responsibility out there in San Diego whose wife was detained, you know, things like that.
She was simply went to try to follow up on her citizenship request for resident status before obtaining citizenship, and she was nabbed right there. Fortunately, she was released, but we've been discussing Noem, Kristi Noem, Secretary of Homeland Security, the way she spends money. And you go to an airport, you see a video of her. You log on your computer, there's a video of her. Television during major sport events where we know it costs hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to advertise for 30 seconds. She pops up on your screen. And being in television, Rudy, you know that these productions cost a ton of money. You have directors, the photographers, the sound people. They get paid by the day, and they get paid thousands of dollars for all these production costs. So she's spending hundreds, if not millions of dollars in these videos that really have no need, or there's no need for them. And then we were also talking about people who are signing up to be ICE agents. We are hearing about this, and this is not confirmed, that Enrique Tarrio, the leader of the Proud Boys, who was convicted for his role in the January 6th insurrection, got 22 years in prison, obviously got pardoned by President Trump. He is said to be now an ICE agent working somewhere in Oregon. So people who are getting jobs with ICE have very questionable backgrounds. Not all of them, some are perhaps very qualified to do so, but there are a lot of people, a lot of agents who are getting jobs simply for signing up. And this journalist who basically lied in her application, made up a lot of facts, purposely tried to get rejected, and then got hired in spite of all of her efforts not to get hired. That raises a lot of questions, raises a lot of flags, and hopefully this is not happening. Hopefully it's not the norm, but it certainly appears to be taking place, which is scary.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to note, too, that, for example, the Jonathan Ross, who's the ICE agent accused of shooting and killing Renee Good last week, you know, that's someone who's had military training. He was a Afghanistan war veteran. So it's someone who has a background. You know, shortly after that, if you do the math, he ended up leaving to go work for the Department of Homeland Security. I believe he was a Border Patrol agent before making his way to ICE. But it also goes to show that people who have prior training and previous experience like this, you know, I'm not trying to cast judgment or, you know, lay anything. But at the end of the day, even if it was an accident or it was the result of, you know, PTSD or whatever, it just kind of goes to show that people with the correct experience, you know, can end up being an issue for the agency. Right. So,
and we're hearing too that Rudy, sorry, but we're also hearing that the training, which used to be a little more than 3 months, has been cut down to 47 days. Yeah. And the number 47, of course, applies to the 47th president of the United States. So perhaps there's an irony there, or it's not a coincidence. But a lot of these people who are going through the training, we're being told, are not passing the physical part of it, the physical training part of it, the education component. They're failing, but in spite of all that, they are still being given badges and put out on the streets. So that is also very troubling, that people who are not qualified, who certainly don't have the mettle to be part of this agency, they are getting the jobs in spite of all that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Salvador. We appreciate you being here today. And of course, thank you to Pablo Manriquez. We wish we could have had you for the full amount of time because it's always a great conversation with Pablo. But Pablo Manriquez of MigrantInsider.com, we appreciate you joining us today, too. So stay with us. We got a couple more headlines when we come back from the break. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Got one more headline to tell you about, and that is Democrats across the country are proposing state laws to rein in federal immigration officers and protect the public following this recent string of shootings we've been talking about today. Now, many of the measures have been proposed in some form for years in Democratic-led states, but their momentum is growing now as legislatures return to work amid President Trump's national immigration crackdown. Republicans are pushing back, blaming protesters for impeding enforcement of immigration laws. In New York and Oregon, Democrats plan to introduce a bill to allow residents to sue federal agents for violating their Fourth Amendment rights against unlawful search and seizure. In New Jersey, the legislature passed 3 bills this week that immigrant rights groups have long pushed for. And in California, we've talked about this before, lawmakers are proposing to ban local and state law enforcement from taking second jobs with the Department of Homeland Security and making it a violation of state law when ICE officers, make indiscriminate arrests around court appearances. There are other measures, of course, pending, and we'll let you know about the biggest ones as they make their way to the wires. Really quick, wanted to tell you about our friends at Political Power Ranker. It's a weekly show tracking the movers, shakers, and rule makers in American politics. Nexstar's Director of Political Content, Chris Berg, and Director of Emerson College Polling, Spencer Kimball, break down who's up and who's down in the world of politics based on data. This week, it's focused on Texas, and that's always a big one when it comes to the border. So make sure to check it out. You can find more on politicalpowerranker at abc27.com, or your local Nexstar station's website. That's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much again to Pablo Manriquez. We'll get him on again in the future. Thank you to our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera. I'm Rudy Mireles. Until next time.